Hi, I'm Dr. Jonathan Reichental, the host of this new online video series called Conversations. In each episode, I will interview thought leaders and experts in the field of government experiences, particularly those in the digital realm. On today's episode, I'm speaking to three distinguished leaders on what the COVID-19 pandemic means to government experiences, both now and in the post-pandemic new normal. Let me first welcome Pete Peterson, Dean of the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University and a Senior Fellow at the Davenport Institute. Welcome, Pete.
Great to be with you, Jonathan.
And next I have Michelle Littlefield, Data and Analytics Manager at the City and County of San Francisco. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jonathan. Nice to be here.
Great to see you. Finally, Dr. Peter Pirnejad, who's a Senior Director of Global Public Sector at Oracle. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As we meet here today on April 15th, 2020, there have been just over 2 million COVID-19 infections worldwide, and 134,000 have lost their lives. 510,000 people have recovered, and in many countries, the rate of new infections is beginning to plateau. However, we are far from being out of the woods with this pandemic. My first question is for you, Pete. Continuity of key services for citizens and businesses is vital in these times. What are the core basic digital services that cities and governments in general need to support during a crisis?
Well, Jonathan, certainly first and foremost for those cities that are providing public services, especially Wi-Fi, that those kind of municipal-based services are vital for the work of city services and also for providing information to the public. When you look at, especially at the city level, you're thinking about the basic services of public safety and in some cases utilities. And so it's really so important for cities and municipalities to continue providing those services, whether it's water, energy, certainly public safety services, but especially for those cities that are providing Wi-Fi from a municipal standpoint to the public. In most cases, those have been provided through libraries, which at this point, all those major gathering spots have been closed. So it's really placed a premium on those cities maintaining those services, not only internally for city officials and city leaders, but for the broader public as well.
Yeah, such important advice. Thank you for that. This question is for you, Peter. What actions are governments taking now that are working? And do you have any examples that stand out to you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So in the immediate actions governments are taking, they're scrambling. The government agencies I've talked to immediately had to shelter in place, and they were using tools at their disposal like WhatsApp and Zoom and FaceTime and anything they could get their hands on, and they quickly were getting inundated. Other cities that had taken some precautions in advance, like Jacksonville, Florida, stood up a 311 solution implemented by Oracle that they were able to use to triage government or citizen inquiries and get them aligned and assigned to the right people. New York, for example, stood up a system in about 4 days with Spiridion using an Oracle Service Cloud installment that, again, was able to get critical information in the hands of people that needed it the most. And even small cities like Malibu, California, only 17,000 people, scrambling at first, but were able to figure a way to enable their EOC, their Emergency Operations Center, to be able to function remotely. By and large, government is a very face-to-face, high-touch industry, and to operate remotely requires some ingenuity for those agencies that were prepared or that can quickly pivot. We're seeing the benefits of a quick response to a crisis like this.
Yeah. Thank you for those great examples. So, there's a lot of things that cities are clearly doing well and governments are doing quite well. There's some cities and governments, as you both point out, that, are challenged with some of the changes that are required. But this question is for you, Michelle. is there anything governments should avoid doing right now in terms of their digital services?
Thanks, Jonathan. No, I think right now everyone especially at the city level, is trying to understand and get real-time information about what's happening on the ground. And so information sharing is very critical to being able to help prioritize the city's resources and mobilize a workforce, a public workforce that are all considered disaster service workers when they sign up to work as public servants. So information is very key. I would say that the one thing that cities will need to avoid having to do is to make sure that we always put privacy as a consideration for the data that is being collected and shared across agencies. I think that's one thing that when you're in crisis mode, especially now during the pandemic, it could be easy to overlook some of those things in the name of trying to respond to a crisis very quickly. And so I think that, for example, some of the media right now where they're talking about phone trackers and apps that are that allow you to be able to know if you've been potentially exposed to the coronavirus. I think that's one thing that potentially could be helpful to the individual. But if you really think about that later on down the line, you really have to think about like the implications and the future use cases of trackers like that, like privacy. Patient privacy is of utmost concern, and that's always something that we need to prioritize, and it is already something that is being protected under federal law. But looking forward, I think that as governments are trying to scramble to understand the existing data that they do have, which is usually siloed, one thing to always keep in mind is, number one, security. How are you securing that data? Who has access to that data? And are we sharing it in a way that is necessary, right? So are we sharing it with the right people and with the correct protections in place? The other piece that is related to privacy is also people movement, right? I mean, we talked about phone trackers. That's one form of tracking, but the other one too is just understanding where people are coming and going, right? If the stay-at-home order persists at the local level, not just here in the United States, but all across the world, governments are trying to find more efficient ways to make people stay at home. And so one thought that's being circulated right now is, should governments at the local level use RFID trackers, right? To allow people to only allow people who live in a particular neighborhood. Those are the only people who are allowed to enter and leave the neighborhood, right? And so I can see that as like maybe that might be effective in the very short term, but we really need to think long term about the long-term implications of privacy and mass surveillance when we start looking at these technologies now to deal with the pandemic, but just in the future. I mean, once you open that door, it's very hard to pull that back.
Yeah, thank you. Great points. Let me just follow up a little bit with you, Peter. You work for one of the world's biggest software companies. How do you think about your privacy right now and the kinds of things we have to put in place to protect people as we go forward?
That's a really good question, Jonathan. So we have been working with UK in enabling some of their records management with the results of some of the COVID testing that they've been doing using blockchain as a means of encrypting that information and keeping it out of the hands of the wrong people. But we recently were awarded a FedRAMP approval for our government cloud centers in the United States, and being compliant to HIPAA standards is the one thing that you can't compromise. And as cities are struggling and looking for tools, the one area that they may overlook is security. And that's something that we're very conscious of, that, as you're looking for the quick fix, don't compromise security in the short run.
Yes, that's great. And just for our international viewers, you referenced HIPAA, which is really the rules and regulations around how we store and protect health information here in the United States. This question's for you, Pete. What is the right role in terms of digital services for cities versus national governments during a crisis?
Well, I think the most crucial role for cities is really in communications. Obviously, the United States, in our federalist context, the the genius of the founders of this country was that in a nation that would become someday, today, over 300 million people, that you had various regions that were that had different backgrounds, cultures, and experiences. And in a crisis such as this, the understanding is, and certainly our experiences thus far, that different regions are experiencing COVID-19 in different ways. You certainly have what's known variously as hotspots in the Northeast, some places in the South, certainly here in the West as well. But you have other places in the country which, at least up to this point, have not had the same level of infections. And so with that, there is built into at least the American system an ability to flex, to have different reactions, a different set of policies, both on a state level and at a municipal level. We've seen here in California a state policy that might differ from another area of the country, but that's in response to local conditions. And in the same way, when we take a step down from the state to the local level, we have major cities such as New York City, which has had a very difficult time with this, is reacting in different ways than, say, Miami or a Dallas or even here where I am in the Los Angeles area. And so with that, the most important role for cities as well as states is to be able to communicate out to their citizens, whether it's at the most localized level, at the municipal level, or at the state level, what these customized policies are, because invariably what comes out of Washington may be a set of, and by that I mean the federal government, what may come out of the federal government may be a set of broad-based or umbrella propositions or recommendations. But the response to COVID, the so-called reopening of businesses, and even the response to COVID itself is going to be customized by states and municipal governments. And so in that, what's so vital about the services around technology is really the ability to communicate, to use everything from GIS mapping to social media for cities to best communicate out to their residents. This is how we are going to respond, whether it's in the closing of businesses or opening businesses, closing of parks or opening of parks. We see really, if you will, a tapestry of different policy responses. And so it's really incumbent upon municipal governments and states to use all the technological tools at their disposal to best communicate with their residents.
Yeah. Communication, in every industry is so important, and particularly important in government and during a crisis for sure. And I'm actually interested to just follow up with you, Michelle, because you work for one of the top cities in the world, San Francisco, and I wanted to just get your perspective. Do you think there's specific roles that a city should do in terms of digital services versus our federal government? What do you think about that?
Specific roles in terms of like just positions in general that the cities should start looking at to hire. I would say that especially at this time, since we have so much unstructured data that's at our disposal. I mean, each department within a city can have their own sets of data, but it's all, it's either on someone's desktop, it's not in a database anywhere that is easily shareable. But when you're trying to respond to a crisis like this, that's when those kinds of challenges begin to surface. And so I think one thing that we want to look at just across cities is as we look to the future, right? During this crisis, it's one thing, but as we look to the future and how we reassess our existing workforce and how we were able to respond in a time of crisis, I think one thing is for sure that we need to start working and looking at challenges in a multidisciplinary way, which means, let's tap into technology. I mean, we're in the middle of Silicon Valley, right? We have the brightest minds in the world coming here to the Bay Area to work at Google, Facebook, Apple, right? But it's almost like you have two forms of Silicon Valley. You've got, the brightest minds in the world who are wanting to come here. But then, when you look at just government in general and the way that processes work and how, the responses, it's just, and the technology stack that is available to us, I think it really shows a great opportunity there to really look at hiring more data scientists, more software engineers, right? More user experience designers, more ethnographers, like really just understanding, how do we understand the customer, both an internal customer and the public facing customer, right? And understanding their needs, and really pairing those subject matter experts along with the policy developers, so that together you can look at a problem from all of these different angles and both come up with, collectively come up with a policy solution as well as a technological solution that is in sync, right? And I think that as we look towards our existing workforce and into the future, that's the kind of workforce that we need to look at in terms of what do we need to do now, what kinds of roles we need for the future.
Yeah, lovely points. And I particularly liked your point about, the fact that Silicon Valley is a place where there are lots of data scientists and software engineers. What you're really saying there is areas of the world should take advantage of their strengths. And if you're a city within a country and you're thinking about what your role can be, perhaps you tap into what you do best. And I think that's reflected in your comments around Silicon Valley in particular. Thank you for that. I'd like to ask you, Peter, a question now. What are we learning about digital services during this crisis? And sort of a follow-up to that is, will this radically change how services are designed and delivered?
Well, Jonathan, you and I worked in one of the most progressive cities, Palo Alto, and in that time, you did an amazing job of really transforming the city, going through a digital transformation of sorts, correct? And
That's
so
right.
we've been working on this digital transformation for a long time. For many cities across the world, that's been an academic exercise. And then when COVID hit, all of a sudden it became a reality, and people dusted off those transition plans and tried to see what they could implement quickest. And now that people are over a month into this COVID crisis, they've had enough time to really reflect on, something like this that requires people to shelter in place, really puts into question our ability to serve when we are needed the most. Government agencies more than ever are being asked to step up and provide continuity at this time of immense need. There's no form of government more than the cities that residents look to for leadership. And so it's so important that we're able to maintain that continuity of service. And so in that, what we're seeing is that those cities that had those transformational plans to really go to an e-government model have had to make do for the time being, but now they're seeing the need to really accelerate that innovation curve and get those elements of their transformation plan in place now or immediately. So we're seeing a big move to the cloud. A lot of cities that were in the cloud were not affected as much as those that were operating with on-premise solutions, for example, or those that already had equipped their staff with laptops and phones and other mobile devices were quickly able to mobilize remotely and telecommute. Other cities had to quickly order hundreds, if not thousands of laptops because they just weren't ready for that kind of service model. Typically, cities in the time of a crisis, whether it be a fire or a flood, mobilize at the emergency operations center. But what happens when you can't? And so what we're seeing is an accelerated digital transformation of sorts. In the short term, it's make do with what you have. In the long term, it's really think about a new service model that not only can respond to crises, but imagine the opportunities it lies for engaging new employees across the globe, filling roles and filling skills gaps that didn't exist, that weren't able to be filled before, because now you're not limited to a geographic boundary or to the cost of living. So I think that is a great opportunity looking out to the future and enabling technology to help bridge the gap in what geography isn't unable to do, or the price of housing. So I think the future is bright once we get past this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your optimism too. Now we have our final question, and this question I'd like everybody to have a go at answering, and I'm going to start with you, Michelle. The question is, what do we need to prioritize in terms of government experience after this crisis and then the new normal?
Well, I think the main thing is, the biggest things that have come up as part of this response to the crisis is the fact that, as Peter had mentioned, transitioning to remote working was a very big transition, not just for San Francisco, but for many cities across the world, right? You're literally telling people they can't leave. So now you have to figure out how you have to continue the services to the public and being able to do that effectively. And so I think there are three things that we need to focus on as we look to the future and what that new normal will look like. First thing is that the digital transformation roadmap that Peter had just discussed, we're literally going from like years to weeks. It's like, that's the acceleration rate, right? And so depending on the size of the city and what you actually need and what your existing capabilities are in terms of being able to work remotely versus not being able to work remotely, one thing that has revealed is just a digital divide within the workforce, right? So when Pete talked about Wi-Fi access, right? Like that was a huge thing, because as we discovered through remote work, some people had better Wi-Fi access while others did not, right? And so there was a delay in that. And so just the new normal really is that remote working is normal, right? There are no, I mean, as long as we can equip staff with the tools that they need, we can work from anywhere and we can respond from anywhere, which is what we need, right? Public servants are human beings also. We also have families and things that, and responsibilities that we need to also take care of as well. And so having that ability to work remotely is very important in order for us to be able to not only take care of the public, but also take care of ourselves. So that's going to be part of the new normal. I think the other thing too is this pandemic, along with many other previous disasters, has shown that we need to work across departments more effectively. And that means sharing data, right? I mean, it is so critical right now to be able to have that level of visibility. We're not aiming for perfect, we're aiming for visibility, okay? In terms of what is actually happening on the ground. And then, that feeds into like the third point, which is this becomes a matching problem, right? Or a matching opportunity between what resources we do have available as a city and where the greatest need is. In order to be able to do that effectively, we need to be able to have that level of information to be able to make those responses more quickly. And in order to do that, we actually need to have like that multidisciplinary team that I was talking about, where we need to upgrade our systems so that we can actually have that level of visibility and access into our own information and being able to share that out with other folks. When it comes to matching resources between what we have as a government and what the public actually needs, the government cannot provide everything, right? And so that also means that being more effective in terms of developing partnerships with both the nonprofit and social sectors, as well as the technology sectors, to understand what they need. And I'll give you a prime example of that. There are many tech companies in San Francisco and in the Bay Area who have shut down their locations and to shelter in place, right? They used to provide, when they did have their employees, they used to provide or feed their employees, like thousands of them, right? And that was just part of the benefit. Well, when you shut those facilities down, you also have to shut down those internal kitchens where they're already budgeted for the year. And so you could potentially partner with tech companies who already have budgeted for feeding their employees, right? We could repurpose that and feed the homeless or feed the people who have just lost their jobs, right? And it's, like I said, it's an optimization and matching challenge, right? And if we could have technology that could help with that pairing and matching and identifying who has the resources and who has the need at a regional level and national and international level, when it comes to supply chain, like we have a very, we're very short on, personal protective gear, right? And that's another thing. And so if we had the ability to automate some of these processes or create some of these visibilities, I think that should be part of the new normal as well, because we shouldn't wait for a crisis to be able to do stuff like this.
Those are some really terrific ideas. Thank you. So Pete, what do we need to prioritize in terms of government experience after this crisis and then the new normal from your perspective?
Well, I'll just riff off of Michelle. I think this is a real stress test on government's ability to think cross-sector. So I'm going to take that, not only thinking about internally across departments, but the governments that are able to reach out and either rely on or launch as new or continue relationships with the private sector and the nonprofit sector, those are the ones that are going to be most resilient in times of crisis. We're definitely seeing this here in California, that those cities that have well-established relationships between the private sector, the nonprofit sector, philanthropic sector, academic sector, along with government, are the ones that are best able to respond to this, because in a crisis, certainly of this scale and scope, government, frankly, does not have all the resources necessary, both in expertise, financial resources, and capacity to respond to it. And so this is a real, I think, eye-opening experience in thinking about what I would call cross-sector leadership. And so for government leaders going forward, I think there's going to have to be, there's going to be a new set of relationships that will have been built through this crisis that are now going to hopefully continue on for what I would call, or what's called, kind of blue sky times, when the dust has settled from this. Those relationships need to continue, because there is going to be a crisis in the future. And so thinking in cross-sector ways, I think, is super important. The second thing I would raise is just the importance of communications. You know, governments don't often think about the importance of communications. Many governments have public information officers. They're very good at what they do. The types of communications that they usually engage in may have to do with particular policies or public meetings or decisions that are made by councils or policymakers. What this has put a real spotlight on is the importance of using technology to communicate en masse to very large audiences. One of the things that we've been involved with here at the Policy School is an initiative that launched a GIS map for the Los Angeles area that through a series of data lenses is providing information to Angelenos on anything from grab-and-go food locations to emergency shelters. Those maps have been seen now by over 1.9 million people just in the last few weeks. And if you think about the importance and the prospects for technology to communicate en masse, it really is incredible, whether it's the GIS mapping or social media or other methodologies or platforms that governments can use. And so thinking very specifically about our communications plans from within government, because frankly, we think about the decisions we have to make, but not often about the ways that we're going to communicate that out to a public that needs to know. And obviously in a time of crisis, that's the time that we need to communicate as quickly and as broadly and as accurately as we can.
Yeah, thank you for that. And finally, Peter, you have the final word on this. What do we need to prioritize in terms of government experience after this crisis and then the new normal?
Right. And I think everything that's been said so far, Pete, Michelle, has been spot on. I mean, from my perspective, I see an increasing enablement of mobile devices, omni-channel experiences, where the constituents, regardless of who they are, and they're all kinds. There's residents, there's businesses, there's contractors, all kinds of constituents that need to continue to engage with government. But try getting your car registration renewed right now. What are you going to do? Try, getting a marriage certificate. What are you going to do? These kinds of services can't stop because of a pandemic. And as trivial as they may seem, when you're at the office getting these things done, it's extremely difficult. It's no trivial task when you're trying to do it electronically. And so government agencies are going to be forced to think about a new government experience that really opens up their service model to a variety of customers from a variety of channels, whether it's from their website or a mobile device or et cetera. The other thing that's going to change, which I am apprehensive about, to say the least, is government does a lot of networking. ICMA, the International City Managers Association, the National League of Cities, the US Conference of Mayors, the largest smart city conference in the world is in Barcelona once a year. And I look forward to those conferences, and we are being asked, and government agencies are being asked, to rethink how they convene to network, to share ideas, to gain inspiration. Looking to mobile platforms like this is going to be something that will amount to a new normal, maybe not completely supplement, but maybe provide a large piece of how government agencies and the private sector, for that matter, engage. So we're going to see a lot more of this type of digital exchange. So to the extent that we start developing better tools that help improve this form of communication, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. So it's going to be an exciting future, one that we're going to all need to be flexible and resilient and able to like kind of flow with this new normal. So
thank you. You guys are so great. Well, that brings us to the end of conversations for now. I'd like to thank my three guests, Pete, Michelle, and Peter, for your valuable and important insights. I'm Dr. Jonathan Reichental, and this has been Conversations. Thank you, and goodbye.